Hi and happy Monday, everyone. Today I have another poem for you. Um, this poem it's kind of a funny poem when you read it through the first time. Um, so there's a couple ways that you can look at this poem. One of them is just to kind of enjoy the humor of the poem. But underneath the humor of the poem, there is a serious message that I'll talk about just a little bit, or I'll give you a little bit of context after we read the poem through the first time. Um, so for now, just enjoy the humor of the poem, and here we go. Okay, so this poem is called Bliss Point, or What Can Best Be Achieved by Cheese, aka the other gold. Now that's the stuff, shredded or melted or powdered or canned. Behold the pinnacle of man in a Cheeto puff. Now that's the stuff you've been primed for. Fatty and salty and crunchy and poof, gone. There's the proof. Though your grandmother never even had one. You can't have just one. You inhale them, puff after puff after puff. You're a chain smoker. Tongue coated and coaxed, but not saturated or satiated. It's like pure flavor, but sadder. Each pink ping in your pinball mouth expertly played by the makers who have studied you. The human animal, and culled from the rind, your Eve in the shape of a cheese curl. Girl come curl in the dim light of the TV. Veg out on the verge of no urge of anything. Long ago we beached ourselves, climbed up the trees, then down the trees, knuckled across the dirt and grasses and thorns and Berber carpet. Now is the age of sitting, so sit. And I must say, crouched on the couch like that, you resemble no animal. Smug in your snuggie and snug in your sloth, you look nothing like a sloth. And you are not an anteater. An anteater eats ants without fear of diabetes. Though breathing, one could say, resembles a chronic disease. What's real cheese and what is cheese product? It's difficult to say, but being alive today is real. Real. Really like a book you can't put down, a stone that plummets from a great height. Life's a page turner, all right. But don't worry. If you miss the finale of your favorite show, you can catch in on cue. Make room for me, and I'll binge on this, the final season, with you. So that poem was Bliss Point, or What Can Be Best Achieved by Cheese, and it was by Benjamin Garcia. I'm going to put a link for you under the comments to the website that has that poem, so you can go back and look at it. In the comments, I'm also going to be putting a link for an article about the bliss point, which is actually a term that the food industry uses. And what that term bliss point means in the food industry is finding the perfect salt, fat, and sugar ratio for a product that will make somebody want to keep eating it, even if they're not hungry anymore. So that's a little bit of additional context, a little bit of additional information that might help you think about the deeper meaning underlying the poem. Of course, I think the poem itself is enjoyable just for the humor and the fact that it talks about cheese and cheese puffs and um, sitting on the couch in your snuggies or whatever it was it said. Um, and that's one way that you can enjoy the poem. But knowing what that phrase bliss point means can help you have an additional understanding of the poem. So take a look at the article that I'm going to put in the comments. And then also one other thing that I wanted you to consider as you look at this poem is the way that the writer did something interesting with the spacing of the poem. You can notice how the poem isn't centered in the middle of the page. It's not done in typical lines that are all about the same length. Instead, the writer has played around with the spacing of the poem. And if you take a look at it, you notice it kind of has this curve to it, which is really interesting. It makes the poem visually interesting. It also makes you pause in really interesting places as you're reading the poem. So that's something to consider, is that interesting way that the writer used spaces, especially here when the writer is using those words real, real, and really. The fact that he's spaced those out and put them each on their own line really emphasizes that idea of real and what's not. So that's interesting to think about. Another thing that I thought this poem did really well, just technically, is the sound. The last poem that I showed you guys had some alliteration in it, which I thought was really well done. This poem also does that. If you take a look at this line here, pink, ping, pinball mouth, expertly played. That P sound repeats a lot, and it gives it a really interesting sound. And also this poem has a lot of rhyme in it. But it's not necessarily straight up rhyme, a little bit, like with puff and stuff. Okay, right here, if you can see that, puff and stuff, that's a straight up rhyme. But there's also what's called some near rhyme. And let's see if I can find one. There was one that I saw as I was reading to you guys. Coated and coaxed, that's a little bit of a near rhyme because those two words sound almost the same. And that's what a near rhyme is. Okay, so another example of near rhyme is here. Canned, the pinnacle of man. They're not exactly rhymes, but they're close enough that they have the feeling of a rhyme. So that's another example of near rhyme. So that's something this poem does really well, is it works in those rhymes and near rhymes, just enough to give the poem a really good sound to it. The rhyming is not overdone, so it doesn't sound like a nursery rhyme. So that's something that technically the poem does really well. All right, so this poem plays around with spacing, plays around with alliteration, and also with rhyming and near rhyming. So that's it for today. Like I said, do take another look at the poem through the link that is going to be in the comments. And also take a look at that article that I'm going to link to in the comments that talks a little bit about this idea of a bliss point. As we're all stuck at home and probably watching a lot of TV and eating a lot of snacks, it's probably a really good article to read and really relevant during this time. So go ahead and check that article out. Okay, see you guys later.